Have you ever wondered what secrets your family might be hiding from you? Unaware of their $50 million inheritance, their white adoptive parents kicked them out of their home after their real parents died. "You have 48 hours to get your things out of here," said Patricia Wellington, crossing her arms as she looked at Marcus and his younger sister, Kesha, standing in a living room they had known as home for 15 years. "We are no longer obligated to support you." The coldness in the voice of the woman Marcus had always called mother cut deeper than any blade. At 21, he had just lost his biological parents in a car accident only 2 weeks ago. And now he was being thrown out on the street along with Kesha, only 17. "But you're our family," Kesha murmured, her eyes filling with tears. "We grew up here." Richard Wellington didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Biological family is different, dear. You need to learn to fend for yourselves now." Marcus felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. The Wellingtons had adopted him when he was 6 after the death of his paternal grandmother. For 15 years, he had genuinely believed he was part of this upper-middle-class white family. He graduated at the top of his high school class, earned a full scholarship to engineering school, always trying to prove he deserved the love and investment they gave him. What he didn't know was that Patricia and Richard had discovered something in his biological parents' documents after the funeral, something that had left them visibly nervous and eager to get rid of their adopted siblings. "Did our real parents leave us anything?" Marcus asked, a strange suspicion growing in his mind. "Any money, life insurance?" "Debt," Patricia replied quickly. "Just debt. That's why you have to leave. We can't take on any more financial responsibilities." Marcus watched Patricia's face as she spoke. There was something there, a nervousness, a rush that didn't fit with someone who was genuinely worried about money. After all, the Wellingtons lived in a mansion in Alpharetta, had 3 imported cars, and Patricia carried handbags that cost more than the minimum wage. "Can you at least give us a week?" Kesha pleaded to find a place. 48 hours, Richard repeated, finally closing the newspaper with a sharp snap. "And take only what you brought. The rest stays." What if this betrayal was just the beginning of a much darker plot? That night, while Kesha cried in the room they were sharing for the last time in 15 years, Marcus lay awake thinking. The Wellingtons had never been affectionate, but they had never been cruel either. This sudden coldness, this rush to get rid of them as soon as they received the documents from their biological parents. Something didn't add up. He vaguely remembered his real parents, David and Angela Carter, as hardworking, loving people. David worked for a logistics company. Angela was a teacher. Simple, honest people who died too young in an accident no one could have predicted. But if they were so simple, why did the Wellingtons seem so eager to get rid of any connection to their legacy? While everyone around him slept, Marcus had an intuition that would change everything. If this story of injustice in family touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, Black Voices, because what the Wellingtons didn't know was that every act of cruelty they committed was being carefully observed by someone who kept secrets much bigger than 2 orphan children could imagine. 48 hours later, Marcus and Kesha were sitting on a bench in a 24-hour diner with 2 backpacks containing everything they owned in the world. The debit card Marcus had tried to use at the ATM had been blocked. The Wellingtons had removed his name from the joint account that had existed since his teenage years. "They really did it," Kesha muttered, stirring the cold coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. 15 years thrown away like we never existed. Marcus watched the early morning traffic through the dirty window of the diner. Uber drivers, night shift workers, people who, like them now, lived on the margins of the society the Wellingtons had frequented with such comfort. "There's something wrong with all this," he said, pulling a crumpled photo from his pocket that he had managed to save his biological parents on his high school graduation day. "Remember how Mom Angela always said that Dad David was careful with money, that he planned everything?" Kesha nodded. "She said he always talked about leaving something for you guys, that he was obsessed with insurance and investments." "Exactly. And then suddenly the Wellingtons find out he died owing money." Marcus shook his head. "People like Dad don't die leaving debts behind. Kesha, they leave plans." Marcus's phone vibrated. A message from Patricia Wellington. "I hope you found a place. We cleaned out your room and donated your old things to charity. Good luck in life. The casual coldness of that message was like a slap in the face. 15 years of Christmases together, birthdays, graduations, and now Patricia was talking to them like they were inconvenient strangers who had finally been removed from her property. She donated our things, Marcus muttered, showing Kesha his phone, including the trunk that Grandpa David left us. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The small wooden trunk David Carter had given them when they were little, telling them to keep important things in it. They had never opened it. They were kids when they got it, and then they forgot about it in the back of the closet. I'm going to call her, Marcus said, dialing quickly. Hello. Patricia's voice sounded irritated. Patricia, it's Marcus. About our things, there was a small wooden chest in the closet. It belonged to our biological father. Oh, yes. That went to charity, too. Why? There might have been important things in there. Documents, family photos, Marcus, dear. Patricia's voice became condescending, as if she were talking to a stubborn child. You need to move on. Clinging to trinkets from the past isn't going to help you build a future. Which charity? I don't remember. Richard took care of it. A silence. Marcus, I sincerely hope you find your way, but please don't contact us again. This phase of our lives has come to an end. The call ended. Marcus stared at the phone, a cold anger rising in his chest. The woman who had adopted him, who had attended all his school performances, who had taken him to the doctor when he was sick, now spoke to him as if he were a pushy salesman. They got rid of the trunk on purpose, he said to Kesha. They were in too much of a hurry to throw everything away. Kesha frowned. You think they know something? I think they know a lot. Marcus opened the used laptop he had bought with money from part-time jobs in college. If the Wellingtons thought two young orphans would just quietly disappear, they were sorely mistaken. At 21, Marcus had one thing they completely underestimated. The fierce stubbornness of someone who grew up always having to prove his worth. What are you doing? Kesha asked. Research. Marcus began typing. If Dad really left us anything, it'll be recorded somewhere. Wills, life insurance, bank accounts. They always leave a trail. Over the next few hours, as the diner filled and emptied around them, Marcus scoured public records, government websites, anything he could find about David Carter and his logistics company. What he discovered made him even more convinced that something was wrong. David Carter wasn't just an ordinary employee. He was a minority partner in the company, had several properties registered in his name, and at least 3 bank accounts that Marcus could trace. More importantly, he had filed a will with the county clerk's office just 6 months before he died. Kesha, he said, his voice tense with excitement. David had a will. It's here in the public records. What does it say? That's what we're going to find out tomorrow. At the courthouse, Marcus closed his laptop, a cold determination settling into his bones. The Wellingtons had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated the intelligence of a young black man from the projects who had learned early on that for people like him, the only real protection came from knowledge and preparation. Every act of contempt, every condescending lie that Patricia and Richard had offered was being carefully catalogued in Marcus' mind. They thought they had gotten rid of a problem, but in fact, they had just created an enemy who would not give up until he discovered the truth. And something told Marcus that the truth would be much bigger and more devastating than 2 desperate orphans could ever imagine. The next morning, Marcus and Kesha were at the door of the probate court as soon as it opened. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, took only 15 minutes to locate David Carter's will in the files. Here it is, he said, handing over a copy. Filed 6 months before his death. Very detailed, by the way. Marcus began to read and felt the world spin around him. David Carter hadn't just left an inheritance. He'd left an empire. Shares in 4 companies, properties in 3 states, investment accounts, life insurance, and a trust fund that had grown to over $50 million. Kesha, he murmured, his voice shaking. Look at this. Kesha read over his shoulder, her eyes widening. $50 million. Marcus, that means the Wellingtons knew exactly what they were doing when they kicked us out. The will was crystal clear. Everything was to go to Marcus when he turned 21. With Kesha receiving her share at 18, there were even detailed provisions for education, healthcare, and a trusted administrator appointed to manage the funds. The trustee listed was James Morrison, an estate lawyer David had met through work. Marcus called him immediately. Carter. Morrison's voice sounded surprised. My God, I've been trying to reach you for 2 years. Where have you been? It's a long story, Marcus said. Can we meet today? 2 hours later, they were in Morrison's elegant office in downtown Atlanta. The lawyer, a black man in his 60s with an imposing presence, listened to the entire story in growing silence. Let me get this straight, he said finally. The Wellingtons adopted them, received the documents after their parents' death, and immediately disinherited them, claiming there was no inheritance. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And they destroyed or hid everything that could connect us to our past. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the table. Marcus, you turned 21 3 months ago. Legally, all of this is already yours. Kesha, you'll be 18 in 6 months, so your share will be released soon as well. But how did they manage to hide this from us for so long? Because you were minors when you were adopted, and you trusted your adoptive parents to inform you of any inheritance. They simply lied. Morrison opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. I've documented everything. Attempts to contact them returned letters, unanswered emails. The Wellingtons systematically blocked all communication. Kesha leaned forward. So, they committed a crime. Multiple crimes, concealment of inheritance, misappropriation, possibly fraud. We're talking decades in prison if we can prove everything. Marcus felt a strange calm wash over him. Can we prove it? Morrison smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but promised justice. Marcus, my boy, I've documented every irregular movement over the last 2 years. Blocked correspondence, ignored attempts at contact, even investigations I hired to track you down. The Wellingtons don't know it, but they built a criminal case against themselves. That afternoon, while Morrison began working on the legal aspects, Marcus decided to do something he had been planning since the night before. He called Patricia Wellington. Marcus. Her voice sounded irritated. I thought we made it clear that we didn't want any more contact. I just wanted to let you know that we found a place to stay, he lied. And that we're fine. That's good. We hope you get settled. Actually, Patricia, I have a question. Do you remember the name of the lawyer who handled my biological father's papers? There are some forms I need to fill out for a job. There was a long pause. I don't remember the name. And even if I did, I don't know if it would be appropriate. Of course, I understand. I just thought maybe you had kept a card or something. But don't worry about it. Marcus, listen. Maybe it's best to just leave the past in the past. Some things are better left untouched. The nervousness in her voice was music to Marcus' ears. Why do you say that? Just some things can get complicated, legally complicated for all parties involved. Marcus almost smiled. Patricia was giving herself away. I understand completely. Well, thanks anyway. After hanging up, he immediately called Morrison. She knows. She was nervous talking about legal comp. Truncated 934 characters, Reckley. Marcus looked out the apartment window, watching the city lights come on. 2 days ago, they had been 2 homeless orphans rejected by the only family they had ever known. Now they had discovered they were multimillionaire heirs whose adoptive parents had committed fraud to hide it from them. Kesha, they watched us struggle, humiliated us, and threw us away like trash. And all the while, they knew we were richer than they would ever be. And now Marcus picked up his phone, checking that the recording app was working. Now they're going to find out that they completely underestimated the wrong 2 people. The plan was simple. One last visit to the Wellingtons with innocent questions about documents and possible inheritances. With any luck, their arrogance would lead them to say something incriminating that could be used in court. What Marcus couldn't have predicted was that Patricia Wellington, in her growing paranoia, had spent the last 2 days consulting her own lawyer and finding out exactly how much she and Richard stood to lose if the truth came out. And desperate people, Marcus was about to discover, were capable of much more extreme acts than simply kicking 2 teenagers out of their home. The next morning, Marcus and Kesha were once again at the door of the Wellington mansion. This time, however, Marcus was carrying something more than desperation. He was carrying a digital recorder in his pocket and the absolute certainty that the next 15 minutes would change everything. Patricia opened the door with an angry expression that quickly turned into poorly concealed nervousness. "Marcus, Kesha, what are you doing here?" "We just want to talk for 5 minutes," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm, "about our biological father's documents." Richard appeared behind his wife, clearly upset. "There's nothing to discuss. We've said everything we needed to say." "Actually," Marcus smiled slightly, "I don't think you've said half of what you need to say." The Wellingtons exchanged a quick glance, the kind of glance guilty people share when they realize they might be in trouble. "Come in," Patricia said finally. "But make it quick." In the living room where they had grown up, Marcus watched the Wellingtons position themselves defensively on the sofa. 15 years of memories of this room, and now he finally understood that he had never really been welcome here. "You knew about the inheritance," Marcus said bluntly. "It wasn't a question." "What inheritance?" Richard tried to sound genuinely confused, but his voice trembled slightly. "The $50 million my father left to me and Kesha." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia turned visibly pale and Richard began to fiddle nervously with his watch. "We don't know what you're talking about," Patricia muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus pulled some documents from his pocket. "A will filed with the county clerk. Business interests, investment accounts, trust funds, all documented, all legal, all ours." "How did you get?" Richard began, then stopped abruptly. "Got what, Richard?" Marcus leaned forward. "How did we find out what you've been hiding from us for 2 years?" Patricia stood up abruptly. "We didn't hide anything. We just protected you from responsibilities you couldn't handle." "Protected us?" Kesha spoke for the first time, her voice heavy with disbelief. "By throwing us out on the street with nothing. You were too young for that kind of money." Richard exploded. "You would have wasted it all. At least this way you learned the value of hard work." Marcus almost smiled. They were giving themselves away completely. "So you admit you knew about the money," he said calmly. Patricia realized her husband's mistake too late. We had our suspicions, but we were never sure." "You suspected enough to block all attempts by Mr. Morrison to contact us over the last 2 years, Marcus continued, watching the panic grow on the Wellingtons' faces. "Morrison?" Patricia's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "The estate administrator. He has documented every returned letter, every ignored email, every attempted contact that you have systematically blocked." Richard tried one last card. "Even if that were true, you could never prove that we did it intentionally." "Actually," Marcus stood up, "we already have." That was when Morrison entered the room, followed by 2 private investigators and a bailiff. The look on Patricia's face was pure horror. "How did you get into my house?" "Kesha opened the back door for us 5 minutes ago." Morrison replied calmly. "While you were confessing to serious crimes on our tape recorders." Richard tried to stand up, but his legs felt like jelly. "Tape recorders? You can't. That's not legal." "Actually," Morrison smiled. "It's perfectly legal to record a conversation when you have consent from one of the parties." And Marcus and Kesha gave their consent. One of the investigators approached Patricia with a document. "Mrs. Wellington, you're being formally notified of a civil action for concealment of inheritance, misappropriation, and malicious interference in family relations." "And that's just the beginning," Morrison added. "The district attorney's office is also interested in the criminal implications of what you've done." Patricia collapsed onto the sofa, her hands covering her face. We just wanted to protect the children. They were so young. Protected. Marcus finally allowed a little anger to show in his voice. You kicked us out of our home. You left us homeless. You watched us struggle for 2 years knowing we were richer than you'd ever be. Richard tried one last desperate defense. The money was safe. You're getting it all back. You're getting it all back. Plus interest plus punitive damages plus compensation for suffering. Morrison confirmed. And you're paying all the legal costs on both sides. Kesha looked around the mansion where she had grown up, seeing it with completely new eyes. You know what's sad? If you had been honest with us, we would still be a family. Now you're just two strangers who committed crimes against us. The bailiff handed over more documents. We also have an order freezing all Wellington assets until the matter is settled in court. Patricia finally raised her head, her eyes red and desperate. Marcus, Kesha, please. We loved you like our own children. We made a mistake. But no, Marcus interrupted firmly. Parents don't kick their children out of their home. Parents don't lie about inheritances. Parents don't watch their children suffer when they have the power to help. Morrison nodded to the investigators. I think we have everything we need here. As they left the mansion for the last time, Marcus heard Patricia sobbing and Richard yelling on the phone with some lawyer about damage control. How do you feel? Morrison asked as they walked to the car. Marcus looked back one last time at the house where he had spent 15 years believing he was loved. I feel free. But true freedom, Marcus was about to discover, would not come from exposing the truth. It would come from building something so magnificently successful that the Wellingtons would spend the rest of their lives regretting underestimating the two children they threw away like trash. 6 months later, Marcus was sitting in the office of the technology consulting firm he had founded with part of his inheritance, looking out over Atlanta from the 30th floor. At 22, he had already created 15 jobs and was negotiating contracts that would change the lives of hundreds of families. Kesha, now 18 and officially heir to her share of the $50 million, had chosen a different but equally impactful path. She had enrolled in law school with a focus on civil rights, determined to help other families go through what they had faced. Did you see the news today? She asked, walking into the office with a newspaper in her hands. Marcus smiled. He had seen it. The headline read, Alpharetta elite couple convicted of $1 million inheritance fraud. The photo showed Patricia and Richard Wellington being escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs. The full investigation had revealed an even broader scheme. The Wellingtons weren't just cruel, they were systemic criminals. It turned out they had done the same thing to 2 other adoptive families over the years, always choosing black orphan children whose biological parents had left significant property or life insurance. 5 years in prison for each of them, Kesha read aloud. Plus full restitution, compound interest, and punitive damages. The judge said it was one of the most calculated and cruel frauds he had ever seen. Morrison had done a masterful job. Not only had they recovered the original inheritance, but the Wellingtons were ordered to pay additional damages totaling another $10 million. The mansion where Marcus and Kesha had grown up auctioned off to pay the legal bills. But true justice had come in the form of complete public humiliation. The case had become a national sensation and the Wellingtons became national symbols of racism disguised as charity. Patricia lost all her friends in her elite social circle. Richard was fired from his financial consulting firm when clients began canceling contracts. You know what's most satisfying? Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. It's not even the money. It's that now everyone knows exactly who they are. Belle Wellington, the Wellingtons' biological daughter, had done something surprising. She had publicly sought out Marcus and Kesha to apologize for what her parents had done. She was working as a nurse and living modestly, having rejected any money that might have come from the fraudulent scheme. You didn't deserve to go through this, she said with tears in her eyes. I always knew my parents were cold, but I never imagined they were capable of something like this. You are more family to me than they ever were. The foundation Marcus and Kesha had created, the David Carter Foundation, had already helped more than 50 adoptive families uncover hidden or stolen inheritances. They hired a team of investigators who specialized in tracking down similar frauds. Morrison, who had become more than a lawyer to them, he was almost a surrogate father, had created a legal protocol that other families could follow. The Carter Protocol was being used by lawyers across the country. Remember when Patricia said some things were better left alone? Kesha laughed that some issues could be legally complicated. Marcus shook his head, still incredulous at the arrogance the Wellingtons had displayed until the very end. She was right about one thing. It was legally complicated for them. Last weekend, Marcus had bought a modest but comfortable house in the same neighborhood where he and Kesha had spent those nights homeless in the diner. Not because he needed to save money, but because he wanted to remember where they had come from. Have you ever thought about what our life would be like if they had been honest? Kesha asked. Marcus considered the question. We'd probably be living comfortably, but still dependent on them. We would never have discovered our own strength. The irony was not lost on him. The Wellingtons' cruelty had forced Marcus and Kesha to become stronger, more independent, and more determined than they would ever have been if they had grown up spoiled with easy money. Patricia Wellington was now living in a government-subsidized apartment, working in a laundromat to pay off her remaining legal debts. Richard sold insurance over the phone, a job he got only because he omitted his criminal conviction on the application. The final narrative loop was perfectly closed. The two children they had dismissed as too young to handle money now ran a financial and philanthropic empire, while the adults who considered themselves superior struggled to pay their basic bills. You know what the best part of all this is? Marcus said, looking at the photo of David and Angela Carter on his desk. Our real parents didn't just leave us money. They left us values. And those values guided us to do the right thing. Kesha smiled. The best revenge really is success. Marcus nodded, watching the city move below. The Wellingtons tried to destroy us, but they ended up destroying themselves. We learned that true wealth isn't in the money you inherit. It's in the character you build when no one is looking. The story of Marcus and Kesha Carter proved a simple but powerful truth. When you try to bury people of integrity, you sometimes forget that some seeds grow best in the dark. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, Black Voices, and share in the comments. What was the greatest injustice you've ever faced and how did you overcome it? Sometimes our greatest enemies end up being our best teachers.